Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining Museum Hue on our final session of our three-part virtual workshop series. The Advocacy Accelerator series will help your organization demystify the lobbying and advocacy process by hearing directly from the experts in government. I want to thank our panelists who is joining us this afternoon to discuss this critical role that the staffers of the Cultural Affairs Committee help and impact your organization. I will now pass it to Addison Tobias to talk about the critical work that we have done this past year and our vision for 2024.
Thank you, Martha. Hi, everyone. My name is Addison Tobias, and I'm the Programs Manager at Museum Hue. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you who are not familiar, Museum Hue is a member-driven organization dedicated to uplifting the voices of people of color in the arts and culture field by offering tools and resources in a supportive environment. The Advocacy Accelerator series aims to demystify the lobbying and advocacy process for organizations by providing actionable steps and resources so you can really learn how to champion your organizations through government advocacy. Throughout the series, we've heard from city and state electeds, government staffers, and attorneys who will discuss the government's critical role in supporting the arts and really illuminate this process of government outreach, funding applications, and collective advocacy. This series stems from the research findings and recommendations in the Hue Arts New York State Brown Paper Report that has been led by Museum Hue, which highlights a greater need in supporting Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, and all people of color led and founded arts organizations. This series is also being created with the intention of developing a breathing toolkit that will be housed on our website and member platform Circle that you can access and use after these sessions are over. They will be accessible to the public, and we really encourage you to check them out post-program. If you're not a member and are interested in becoming one, your organization can join for $150 a year, or as an individual, you can join for $30 a year to access all prior and upcoming resources and free registration for programs. If you have questions today, please email them to hello@museumhue.com, and we will be sure to get them over to Martha to answer ahead of time, and I will drop this in the chat in a moment. And please be sure to keep an eye out for Museum Hue's 2024 programs and consider membership. I will now pass it back over to Martha to kick us off.
Thank you, Addison, for updating us on the advocacy work Museum Hue has done this year. To learn more, please check out our website and follow us on social media. Now I want to introduce our amazing panelists, May Vutrapongvatana, who is the Director of Policy and Budget for New York City Council Member Chi Ossé, is an attorney, a boxer, and a legislative wizard, a true triple threat. She is responsible for our legislative side of of Chi Ossé's office, developing and passing laws and helping to design the budget. She also leads our efforts in participatory budgeting programming and is also the New York City Council members. He is also the co-chair person for the Brooklyn delegation. So thank you, May, for joining us, and we really, really appreciate you taking the time to join us and talk to us about government.
All to the webinar today. As Martha says, my name is May Vutrapongvatana, and I have the honor and distinction of serving the 36th District with Councilmember Chi Ossé. In addition, he is also the chair of the Committee on Cultural Affairs, Libraries, and International Intergroup Relations. So I may have had the honor of working with some of you in legislation, at Culture at 3, and a bunch of our budget advocacy asks. So I'll kick it off to Martha to begin the questions.
Thank you, May. So our first question, can you tell the audience about your role at the New York City Council and how your role intersects with the cultural sector?
My role, I mean, there's two sides of it, right? There's the policy side, which is creating laws, crafting legislation, which is not what we're going to talk much more about today, but I'm also the budget director for the council member, which, as Cardi B says, we're here to talk about the money. How does my role intersect with the cultural sector? So twofold, right? On a local basis, we represent the neighborhoods of Bed-Stuy, North Crown Heights, which are huge cultural hubs in Brooklyn. Bed-Stuy itself is a huge cultural mecca of the borough, with artists like Jay-Z and Biggie starting their roots here. We have lots of cultural spaces like the Billie Holiday Theater that mean a lot to the people of our district and the borough as a whole. And Central Brooklyn really As we speak today, the council member is going to a new theater in the district called Crown Hill, which celebrates a lot of Brooklyn's legacy, especially those of the Black community. Level as the chair of cultural affairs, I have the honor of advocating for you all on a city level and helping the council member do that work. So we work with many folks are here today, but the Billie Holiday Theater, Kumbe, Sirens Protectors of the Rainforest, Asase, some of our cultural groups here, and working with them to get them their funding. And then on a citywide level, helping the council member advocate for the general DCLA budget, as well as working with the speaker's office to partner with larger orgs or orgs that need a larger sum of money for discretionary funding.
Thank you for that. So what initiatives exist within the New York City Council for organizations to receive funding? And can you explain discretionary funding?
The way to do it is just to explain discretionary funding. There's a lot of misconception to the word discretionary funding. So first, I just want to say there's two types of discretionary funding. The one that everyone talks about, which everyone mislabels as discretionary funding, is the expense side, right? So it's discretionary expense funding. What that means, it's funding for programs and services. So your operating costs, the cost to run a show, the cost to run an after-school program, those fall in that budget. Then there's discretionary capital funding, which is more like physical objects, right? So acquisition of buildings, like let's say you're a cultural space and you really want to funding to provide for that space, then you would use that funding through capital funding. If you need tech upgrades for, your nonprofit or your program, you would ask for that type of funding. So there's two types you can ask for. I think when we're talking about cultural programming, most ask for expense funding. And there's different places to get that from the city. You can get that through the city council, which is through folks like ourselves and other council members of the other 50 districts. You can get that from the borough president's office, and you can also get that from the speaker, which is at this right now it's Speaker Adrian Adams. There's also other funds on the state and federal level, which I'm not privy to, but I know those are also there. Initiatives, those are kind of topic specific funding that the council member allocates to solve different issues around the city. There are sanitation initiatives, there's domestic violence initiatives, mental health initiatives. But the ones that I'm going to talk to you all today that are of interest would be the cultural initiatives that are run through the Department of Cultural Affairs. Those are CASA, which stands for Cultural After School Adventures, which provides funding, $20,000 discretionary funds for after school programs. To CASA, which is the same thing but for senior centers. The Cultural Immigrant Initiative, which is funding provided to groups that kind of talk about the diversity and the immigrant culture of our city. Those are the three discretionary initiatives, which are the initiatives that each council member gets to determine where that money goes. And then there's larger initiatives, which are decided by the speaker's office, which is Arts as a Catalyst for Change. Those are groups looking to curb or mitigate and tackle the issue of gun violence, and the coalitions of the theaters of color, which support theaters such as the National Black Theater up in Harlem, to support theaters that promote or run by or serve communities of color. Those through DCLA. Now, before we move on to the next question, I just want to preface these are a grant. These are reimbursement funds. And I think a lot of groups have this misconception that this is money that you're going to get upfront. Unfortunately, with city council funding, you do not upfront. You will, after you pay for it, and then it's a reimbursement process.
So can you hear me, May? Great. So can you talk a little bit about the reimbursement process in terms of for like a new organization who's never applied for city funding? Can you walk us through, what are kind of the prerequisites that have to come along with the application?
First and foremost, only 501c3 organizations are able to apply. If you are not a registered official state 501c3, you will not qualify for the funding. I'm an attorney by trade, so I'll have to kind of go into the legal perspectives of this. Because it's not a grant, it's a contract, right? The principle behind discretionary funding is that these are contracts that the city uses to contract with an outside provider. So there's a lot of vetting, there's a lot of review, and there's a lot of standards that an org has to take. One of them being that you must be a 501c3. The that you have to be willing to go through a review process through the Office of General Counsel, which is the City Council's and the finance division. They're looking at, your fiscal records, they're looking at your social media. They just want to be able to see work the city council works with and the city as a whole is going to cause them flags, right? When you're entering into a contract with someone, you want to make sure that the services that you're providing are actually legitimate. You want to make sure that the community is benefiting from this. And you want to make sure that all of your programming is open to the public, right? We're not going to contract with a party that is going to just do private showings for a small selected amount of people. We're not going to just contract with organizations that are not going to provide or have the capacity to provide a service to the city. And so those are really, really important. The mayor's office of contract services. So after that review process, you're going to be dealing not with the council, but rather with the mayor's office on contract services to formulate that document. And from there, there's going to be certain trainings that you have to attend, and different documents that you'll have to send in and they'll tell you everything because unfortunately I don't see the back end of all of that. But the Office of Mayor's contracts will help you through that, and then you'll be assigned to an agent help you meet those needs, right? Which is, and about this, Martha, is if you sign up for both the council funding and the cultural development fund, your agency will likely be the Department of Cultural Affairs, and they will assign you a grant officer to help you with the documentation to submit.
Yes, that's really helpful. So can you talk about when these applications are coming out and when should organizations start preparing?
The document itself will come out at the start of January. That's when discretionary funding is opens. So I would say the first week of January, that's when things come. And I will send all of this in a follow-up document, but we can find all this on the council's website. So in addition, so that's the main application. This application is super crucial. If you are an organization and you do not submit this application in, you are not allowed to get council funding. You have about a month to do it. So in the past, I've only been in the council for 2 fiscal cycles so far, and it's always been January, and then the application closes at the end of February. So you have about a month to get everything together. We understand that this is a lot, especially for smaller orgs that may not have a grant writer, that do not have the capacity to sit down and do these grants. We invite orgs, there are resources out there. DCLA does workshops on how to apply for these grants, both I'm not sure the council grant, but they definitely do a CDF training. I would reach out to them. The nonprofit help desk which is a nonprofit that helps other organizations apply for funding, does trainings at the start of January. I would invite folks to look at those. And then the Brooklyn Arts Council, I know the different arts councils around the borough have support in grant writing and council funding. So I would also reach out to your local arts council as well to see how they can help support you in doing that. But yes, I would say discretionary funding is, I think, one, meeting those documents, getting those documents in, but two, talking to your an org. Meetings are not guaranteed. The reality is most offices are a small office with, one user. And but at least I would say, if not a meeting, definitely follow up with one pagers, talk to send folks emails about what your organization's about. And then, really focusing on the hyper local aspects, right? Council members want to make sure that they're supporting orgs that are really going to give back into their district, really show that. I know for Council Member Ossé, that is important for him. So I would definitely really, really show the scale and the impact of the work that you're doing in the district. And I think lastly, what I'll say is, just the outreach is really important, forming partnerships, forming relationships. If that isn't happening this year, work with the local council member to bring some of the programming into that district, bring it to their schools, bring it to their senior centers. It's really about relationship building and also proving that you can do the services in the district.
Thank you for that. So for organizations that may be applying for funding from the city council for the first time, what advice or tips would you give them? And what resources and support exist to help organizations navigate the funding process?
Mentioned, contact your local arts council, talk to, your the nonprofit help desk. I know DCLA has some resources, and also the Culture at 3 calls. I don't know if some of the Culture at 3 folks are on here, but that's a community that provides a forum for our organizations to really, issue what can be done better or gain support. And even if you're not on the call, but that community and speaking to folks like Lucy Sexton, who runs those calls, or one on how the process works and how to start getting those funds. Of advice and tips, I think one is relationship building, not just with the members, but just the cultural community as a whole. I truly do believe, and even it's only been my second year going into my third fiscal cycle, and there's still a lot more that I have to personally know. I know that I think information exchange is always valuable in community. Of course, your targets, right? So a lot of orgs, what they'll do is they'll is in district 15 is in district 6. Really the delegations, speakers, I would say focus on those 3.
So can you talk a little bit more about the leave behinds and building relationships? Some folks aren't familiar with their council members, or even, the programming they provide, they're getting folks that come in from different parts of the city, and those people have representation, right? So can you talk a little bit more about building those relationships with the elected officials and the leave behinds and things like that?
Different. I know what we may do in our office may be different from another council member. Personally, for me, I'm very, very about I like to read things, right? I mean, it's just the lawyer pagers about the mission of your district and numbers and statistics, right? Council member is looking for. I say it's about the impact and the scale of the work that you do in district. How many percentage of students enjoyed this program in this school? How many percentage of seniors enjoyed, this center? How many kids have graduated from this music program? So things of that sort, where we really want to see sticks. Principle behind discretionary funding really is, it's a contract between the city and a partner to provide a service. And we want to see if that service is able to be full the communities that we serve. And so really anything a service being provided in the communities that these elected serve is going to be crucial. And I would just ask the budget director, right? There are some budget directors that would prefer a presentation. There's some budget directors that like to do one-on-ones. There's some budget directors that would just rather get a one-pager with a summary and read that. I would say work with budget directors on what kind of information works best for them. But I always like to say keep it simple and short.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So what are the basic parameters an organization needs in order to meet to apply for funding? What do organizations need to do before applying?
The most crucial thing is making sure that you're an established 501c3. We have organizations that come in and they're like, well, we're still waiting for the Department of State to give us this. That isn't gonna, you have and you should be an established 501c3 before you apply. It cases where people have been in the midst of applying but it's a close call, right? Like we've been in that situation where orgs that are well-meaning and really driven and they're like, hey, applications, but you know, it's not coming. It's for the org, it's difficult on you guys, it's difficult on us. C3. Individual artists, I get this a lot from the cultural media community. Unfortunately, no. We can't fund art collectives that aren't 501c3s. We can't fund LLCs. We can't fund groups that aren't a nonprofit, and we can't fund individuals. I mentioned this. It comes back to accessibility of how broad your programming is. So, like, it can't be just for a certain demographic, right? It has to be open for the public. If it's in a DIFTA run a Department of Aging senior center, it's technically open for the public, but just geared to a certain demographic. But ultimately, all members of the city, because of First Amendment separation of church and state issues, all orgs are secular related or provide secular programs. So we can't fund, let's say, a Christmas play about the nativity at a church. We cannot fund that, right? We can't fund, let's say if someone wants to do, a musical or something that a synagogue is put in, we can't necessarily fund that. That's where it kind of gets tricky between church and state. But really that's it. I mean, there's other parameters that are more detailed, and of course there's a handbook that is sent over to orgs every year. I have the 2024 one that I can send over to Martha afterwards for her to send over to everybody. So I would say look into that. And I think the most important thing is really know and be realistic with your fiscal capacity. I mentioned this earlier. It's a reimbursement process. You need first, and that you're able to reimburse it. Use this money, right? Everyone would love a good chunk of money, but this money is only valid for a year. So if you're not able to spend $100,000 in a year, we ask that you become realistic with your ask and ask for what you are able to spend within a year. I think people like to be really ambitious and ask for as much as they can, which is absolutely what anyone would do. Know your org is a small org, you're still starting up, and you ask you to spend $200,000, be very realistic about what you can do with the need.
Thank you for that. So when you're looking over these budget requests, what stands out to you and what elements would make a request successful?
Me personally, the skill and like the amount of impact that you do for me, it's like if an org has had like deep roots within district, drawing programs and sketching programs. And, we have, we're able to take like 20 kids, and parents are asking us for interest, and people really, really want this program to stand out to us. So anything that's like, it goes back to community, right? I think it, nicest presentation, flashiest, like, slides and like great pictures and great messaging. But if there's nothing about what you have done in Bed-Stuy, in North Crown Heights, then we're not going to fund you. If the community is not vouching for you, if teachers, principals, parents aren't vouching for you, our seniors aren't vouching for you, then this is something that we're likely going to pass on. Like, you could be a great org, you can do amazing Bronx and Queens, but if there is no return back in District 36, then we are not likely to fund you. So I think really be intentional about your targets. If you know that, you're still with District 36 and it's not there, but you really want to do the work, talk to us. We can partner up with you maybe on some events, see the work that you and the investment that you want to do in our district, and then we'll look into funding for next year. It goes back to how many, like, what longevity of it, right? And then also like anecdotes. The best, like not the best, but some of the more like the most memorable pitches have been, like there's been stories of like students who've gone on, like, who will do a music program and they've gone on to go to music-based high schools like LaGuardia, or even pursuing music careers outside of that work, something like that. Or, telling us that seniors are really, really engaged in a certain type of drawing class because it really does keep them, rooted to home, their culture, and all of that. So really, that's what stands out to me in and also what stands out to the council member as well.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more of like, what are your metrics of success? Like, what do you deem to be a successful program? Obviously it's great to have validators in the community, but some folks don't do, necessarily the outreach in the community. They kind of stay in their own silo and where they're comfortable. So what are your metrics to show that it's a successful program?
If you're saying that, like, okay, 40% of students come back every year, or like 30% of 40 students come back every year in the school, then we're like, okay, if 40 students, because trust me, I understand I was a uninterested teen, but if we got 40 kids coming back to your program, then we know you're doing something right. So that's where the numbers and stats come in, right? If people are saying, oh, we're seeing seniors come in every day for these programs, where there's like, out of X amount of seniors, 20 seniors are coming every day to our pottery class, and they're coming and they're getting engaged. And I'm like, okay, cool. Just any type of statistic, like, we're running 5 classes a day here. I mean, sorry, like 5 classes a day here. They want 5 more. And like, we're seeing that, and we're getting those requests from our program coordinators. Like, things like that is what kind of will help us stand out. It, really, like, I understand that people don't have time to do the community outreach, but I think just seeing the numerical stats on that is success, right? If people could world where there's so many options and people are continuously coming back, especially kids, you're doing something right.
Thank you. So what's for our final question, what's the one thing you want folks attending to take away from this conversation today?
Set the realistic tone, not to kind of be not, I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but I just want to be realistic about city funding. Is that city funding is very, very limited. Each council member, and this amount changes every year, but each council member gets $400,000 each discretion to spend in their district. Not a huge sum of money. And it's also reimbursement money, right? So really what I want to tell folks is be and what it takes. If you're not able to put the money up front and get this reimbursed, I would suggest looking for more robust grants, right? I would diversify the number of grants. I think people have a lot of reliance on council grants and city funding and not look at other options. It's very, very key to diversify the different types of grants that you're putting in. And like I said, right, the folks who know how to do this are your art councils. Reach out to them. They know the different types of grants and grants that you don't even have to reimburse, right? Grants that you'll get up front. I would say speak to them. And then, of course, and I'm going to tell every cultural org this, please, because it will not be eligible and you will not have a program under DCLA. And they're the agency that's most effective to helping your org get that money. So if we're say one, be realistic about the funding, really know your parameters and what your capacity. Two, scale and reach. That's really important in the district. What is your scale? What is your reach? Say, please do your CDF funding applications. I really like any application. So your big ones are your council application and your CDF application. Individuals may do supplemental applications. So those I'm going to leave my email in the chat before we wrap, and I'll send a follow-up document, but those are the things I would like people to know.
Thank you so much, May. We really appreciate your time this afternoon, and we'll share the resources that you send over to us. So on behalf of Museum Hue, thank you all for joining us for this series, and please keep an eye out via email for the links to the recordings and the resources which will be accessible to all. Thank you and have a great day.